Dear learners, I welcome you all to this course, Understanding Human Rights. So far, we have been discussing about the United Nations and human rights, what kind of role United Nations Charter played in the promotion of human rights globally. And after that, we also discuss about the UDHR, that is Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and how this Universal Declaration of Human Rights played an important role in the universalization of the concept of human rights. After discussing the various provisions of the UDHR, that is Universal Declaration of Human Rights, uh, we are going to discuss today the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that is ICCPR. Uh, we have been mentioning that you see, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is a legally binding instrument of human rights. So that is why it is not like UDHR, which is merely a declaration. So therefore, we have to see here that how International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is being implemented across the globe. So in this lecture, first of all, we will try to introduce the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and its background. After that, we will discuss the features of the ICCPR. Then preamble, the main provisions when we are going to discuss. First of all, we have to understand the preamble. After that, significant provisions of the ICCPR. There are many articles, so that is why we cannot discuss all the articles. So therefore, we will take some important articles, and we will try to have an idea of the provisions that are there in the covenant. And then implementation mechanism is important. Why? Because the UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, did not, when we discuss, it does not have any implementation mechanism. Of course, it was not designed to be, implemented by the state in that way. Basically, it was the UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was an instrument that created a conducive human rights culture, and internationalized, sensitized countries and people about the inalienable human rights. And that's why you will find that later on many human rights treaties and conventions or the covenants were adopted by the United Nations. After implementation mechanism, we will discuss monitoring body, and then first optional protocol to the ICCPR, the second optional protocol to the ICCPR, and then conclusion. So, as discussed in previous lectures on UN and human rights, the UN Charter mentions in its preamble and several articles in the UN Charter that promoting human rights is one of the purposes of the establishment of the United Nations. We had discussed their specific provisions, as well as how in the preamble itself, you will find in the preamble of the Charter, how the human rights, or to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, was emphasized. After that, we have to understand that International Bill of Rights, we have already discussing. We were discussing this International Bill of Rights, and we found that there are three important documents or the instruments of human rights, and they form what is called International Bill of Rights. First of all, it is UDHR, number one. Number two, it is International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that is ICCPR. And then number three is International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, that is ICESCR. And then there are optional protocols. Together, these instruments of human rights are called International Bill of Rights. Keep in mind that UDHR is a declaration, and that's why you'll not find implementation mechanism in this declaration, because declaration cannot have implementation mechanism. But the ICCPR and ICSCR, they are legally binding treaties with effective implementation mechanism as well. And then the optional protocols are also there. We will be having discussion on them. A very significant point that should be brought to the notice of the learners, that you'll find what has happened from 1945 to the adoption of the ICCPR, ICSCR, that from promotion to protection of human rights, the journey from promotion to protection of human rights. And this journey, you have to understand why what these words, promotion and the protection, they signify. The UN Charter uses the expression promotion of human rights 7 times, but does not use protection of human rights anywhere. So, when you are going through the UN Charter and you are trying to see its several articles, you will find that at 7 places, the UN Charter is mentioning promotion, and that is promotion of human rights. Whereas nowhere it is mentioning protection of human rights. So, what is the reason why, what are these, when we are saying promotion and then we are saying protection? So, what these two words signify, that we are going to discuss right now. The expression promotion in the Charter signifies setting international human rights standards through declarations, observations, and inspiration. So that is why the word promotion is important here. When the UN Charter was adopted in 1945, you will find at that time it was very difficult to develop consensus on the catalogue of rights. So first of all, that was the first thing. That is why, the UN Charter is mentioning about the promotion of human rights, but it is not mentioning, the specific right that it is going to promote in the world. So, when the UN Charter is using the word promotion, it means it will make efforts, it will endeavor to create a human rights culture across the globe. And that will be done through declarations, which is not having any legally binding force. Observations, inspiration, motivations, dissemination of knowledge about human rights, then sensitization. These are the important things that United Nations was doing from 1945 onward. So the charter is using the word promotion. Why? Because there was no international protection of human rights mechanism within the charter. Of course, if you go through the charter, you'll find that how the promotion, how international peace will be maintained, international peace and security. For that, the detailed provisions are already there in the UN Charter. But how human rights will be protected, you will not find that kind of detailed provision in the UN Charter. So that is why, the word, the expression promotion or the word promotion was used, not protection. In contrast, the expression, that is protection, requires international protection of human rights through effective international mechanism. So you see, that is why United Nations Charter, it was deliberately not using the term protection, because there was no protection mechanism for human rights at that time. So that is why the promotion was used, because promotion means dissemination of knowledge, motivation, various observations of the issues of human rights, sensitizing countries and the leaders about the significance of human rights, all these things, that United Nations plan to do. And so now you can understand the difference between the word promotion and protection. And so that is why you will find that the word promotion, if that found a place in the UN Charter, and the word protection did not find a place in the UN Charter originally, it is not by accident. It was a deliberate effort, you will find. So, because in the very beginning they wanted to promote human rights, and after that, United Nations wanted to develop a mechanism of international protection of human rights. The UN promotes human rights by explicitly mentioning it in the Charter and subsequently through persuasion and motivation. You see. So from 1945 onward, you will find United Nations what it did. It assigned the task to General Assembly, Economic and Social Council, and then the Human Rights Commission to promote human rights. And how they promoted human rights? The UN promotes human rights by explicitly mentioning it in the Charter and subsequently through persuasion and motivation. So the meetings, conferences, and then the leaders being invited, representative being invited, and then the drafting of the declarations, and then the treaties of human rights. All these things United Nations was trying to do. The UN declarations, mark the word declaration I am saying. The UN declarations on human rights do not have an implementation mechanism, but they play a significant role in universalizing human rights. So we have already discussed the significance of the UDHR in our previous lectures and mentioned how it has inspired countries to include human rights in their constitution and how it also led to the creation of regional instruments of human rights. So, while discussing the significance of UDHR in our previous lectures, we have already emphasized the point that UDHR, that is Universal Declaration of Human Rights, may not be a legally binding instrument of human rights, but it has assumed the status of customary international law. It is the most cited instrument of human rights, and that's why the UDHR played an important role in universalizing human rights. That is the way to promote human rights across the globe. So, this was the first step towards developing what is called international consensus on the catalog of rights. So, that is why for that United Nations must be given credit. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is a step toward international protection of human rights. Now you see, from promotion to protection. So, up to the UDHR, you will find what was happening, that the United Nations was trying to promote human rights. But now when the United Nations is moving to adopt the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that is ICCPR, it is a step toward international protection of human rights. However, it is pertinent to mention here that when the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on 10 December 1948, the same year, just one day before this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the United Nations had adopted Convention Against Genocide, which is a legally binding treaty on human rights. So, that was because the consensus was achieved, so that is why the Convention Against Genocide was adopted by the United Nations. But now you see that drafting of a legally binding treaty with so many rights and then developing an international consensus was a big challenge. So about the UDHR, we had already mentioned in our previous lectures that it was called the Magna Carta of Mankind. Such an important document. I had mentioned in our preceding lectures that UDHR was declared by the UNGA, that is United Nations General Assembly, as the common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations. Now, this we have mentioned. Then it was also called the Magna Carta of Mankind. However, despite these high-sounding words means the common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, the Magna Carta of Mankind, all these things were there with the UDHR. However, despite all these high-sounding words, we must acknowledge the fact that it was merely a declaration without any implementation mechanism. So, it may be the Magna Carta of Mankind, it may be a very important document, it may be the common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, but It was merely a declaration without any implementation mechanism. The, the adoption of ICCPR on 16 December 1966 was a step toward the international protection of universally accepted civil and political rights through an effective implementation mechanism. So, that is important to note that when this ICCPR was adopted on 16 December 1966, it was a step toward international protection of universally accepted civil and political rights through an effective implementation mechanism. The international scenario and the adoption of two covenants simultaneously. Again, this is a significant point that needs elaboration. You see, it was not the ICCPR alone which was adopted on 16 December 1966, but you will find that ICSCR was also adopted on the same day. So simultaneously, you will find that two legally binding international treaties of human rights are being adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. So why this was happening? That international scenario we should try to understand. And you see, first of all, when it was adopted in 1966, you see that it was already, the work of drafting the ICCPR and the ICSCR, or, earlier it was planned that there will be a legally binding international treaty of human rights, which will be all inclusive. So it is again important to note that it is also significant to note that while the UDHR was drafted in 18 months, the two covenants, these two covenants that we are talking about, ICCPR and ICSCR, took 18 years to complete. Why this happened, that is to be understood. First of all, the reason for this long period was that consensus building on including the most comprehensive catalogue of rights in the legally binding treaties was a challenge. So first of all, why it was a challenge? First of all, you'll find that the world was divided into two hostile blocks. The two hostile blocks were the socialist bloc and the capitalist bloc. The socialist bloc was headed by the Soviet Union and former Soviet Union, of course. And then the capitalist bloc was led by the United States of America. They were ideological blocs. And the ideological conflict on the catalogue of human rights was very much visible whenever there was any discussion. First of all, you'll find that while tracing the origin of the concept of human rights, of course, in the Western tradition, we found that it started with the Magna Carta and then continued through the various important events like Glorious Revolution of England. Then you will find the American War of Independence, French Revolution, and then after that we found that the Bolshevik Revolution of Russia, Chinese Revolution of 1949, all they played important role, and up to the International Bill of Rights, which was adopted by the United Nations, all we discussed. In the beginning, we found that from Magna Carta to the French Revolution, we will find civil and political rights were emphasized. Why? Because the Western liberal nations, they championed the cause of civil and political rights. So that's why the capitalist bloc was giving importance or significance or priority to civil and political rights. They were more interested in democracy, individual freedom, etc. Whereas the socialist bloc was emphasizing on socio-economic and cultural rights. So that is why that ideological division you have to keep in mind. Secondly, you will find that after the Second World War, there were intensification in the national liberation struggles across the globe, and that is why many countries were liberating and they were becoming the member of the United Nations. So the new entrants were there. Originally only 50 members were there. Later on you will find that many members joined. Today it is more than 193 members in the United Nations. So it is not the earth has not expanded. What has happened that at that time most of the parts of the world, they were under colonial rule, but they got independence and they started joining United Nations. So now the new entrants were also there. So a lot of discussion was taking place for the incorporation of human rights, because the change of circumstances were there, change of approaches were there. You will find it is not only ideological division that was there. The cultural factor should not be ignored. And that we had already discussed in the universalism versus cultural relativism debate. So when the United Nations was trying to develop a international mechanism of international protection of human rights, and that too with a legally binding treaty, so that is why developing consensus was difficult. Why? Because of the diversity of culture, because many countries were feeling uncomfortable with many rights that were going to be incorporated over in these ICCPR and ICCPR. So these factors must be kept in mind. So this was the reason that it took 18 years from 1948 to 1966 to develop consensus and then come up with these two legally binding instruments of human rights. So these factors must be kept in mind, and that is why I mentioned it here. So the learners have to know these factors, that these were the factors responsible for the long period of time it took in drafting and then coming for the adoption in the UN General Assembly. You'll find in the ICCPR, if you see the provisions, it includes first generation rights or negative rights. So the ICCPR, when it was adopted, it was basically to satisfy the aspirations, first of all, of the Western liberal nations, and it was also giving a concrete shape and international recognition to what is called the Western paradigm of human rights or the Western notion of human rights. So that is why it included first generation rights, or what we call the negative rights, civil and political rights, you can say. Now, from civil and political rights, when we are discussing you see the nomenclature that has been used. ICCPR, we are talking about ICCPR, that is International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The nomenclature, the title given to it itself shows that it was going to emphasize civil and political rights. After this, we are going to deal with the ICCPR, what kind of provision it has, and what kind of rights have been emphasized. So the ICCPR has a preamble and 53 articles divided into 6 parts. So in this there are 53 articles and the preamble. I am going to read out the preamble. And in this preamble, first of all, United States, the states parties to the present covenant, considering that in accordance with the principles proclaimed in the Charter of the United Nations, recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. So, first of all, this is important. That what is the precondition for the justice, peace, and freedom in the world, and that they are saying inherent dignity, recognition of the inherent dignity, and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. You know, this is important to understand. So that becomes a precondition. It is being mentioned in the preamble. Again, it says recognizing that these rights derived from the inherent dignity of the human person. So that legitimacy to the rights that they are, these rights derive from the inherent dignity of the human person. So it means a dignified existence of individual is not possible without recognition of these rights that the preamble is trying to proclaim. Recognizing that in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you see, I had already discussed that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the most cited, instrument of human rights. You will find in all the human rights treaties of the United Nations, the UDHR is cited. So that is why what is happening here, that for earlier you will find that the UN Charter has been cited, and now it is the UDHR is being cited. Recognizing that in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the ideal of free human beings enjoying civil and political freedom and freedom from fear and want can only be achieved if conditions are created whereby everyone may enjoy his civil and political rights as well as his economic, social and cultural rights. You see, that is also being mentioned in the preamble. Although, this particular ICCPR is dealing with civil and political rights. If you see the nature and the content of the rights that are there in the ICCPR, they are basically dealing with the civil and political rights. But, in the preamble, it has been already mentioned that not only civil and political rights, but economic, social and cultural rights are also important. Considering the obligation of states under the Charter of the United Nations to promote universal respect for and observance of human rights and freedoms. You see, so all the countries who are the member of the United Nations, they have already agreed upon what? That they have agreed upon to promote universal respect for and observance of human rights and freedoms. In principle, they have already agreed upon it. And that is why they have become the member of the United Nations by signing by agreeing with the provisions of the Charter. Realizing that the individual having duties to other individuals and to the community to which he belongs is under a responsibility. It is talking about the duties and the responsibilities, not only rights. Under a responsibility to strive for the promotion and observance of the rights recognized in the present covenant, agreed upon the following articles. So, that is all about the preamble. You see what are the citations, what are the references, what is being referred. You will find UN Charter, the provisions of the UN Charter, then the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and all the member states, they have agreed upon the provisions of the Charter that is being emphasized. And then in the light of all those things, it is also being, observed that human rights or the promotion of human rights or the observance of human rights, that is being recognized as a precondition or a condition for maintaining peace and order in the world. So with this, with this preamble, the ICCPR goes to include 53 articles dealing with different kind of civil and political rights that we will be highlighting in our next lecture. So with this, we are going to conclude this lecture today, and in the next lecture we are going to take up the main provisions of the ICCPR, and after that the implementation mechanism, what are the unique features of the ICCPR. All these things we will be taking up in the next class. So thank you very much.